The React Counter app, a staple app for anyone learning React. So today we're going to walk through building this application. First, we need to initialize our React app by running npx create react app, followed by the name of our app in our command line. This will create all the necessary components needed to run our app. Remove all the pre-populated boilerplate tags so that you are left with a div with the class of app. Inside of this div, we're going to use a paragraph tag to display the current count. For now, we're going to manually set it to 0, but we're going to make it dynamic in the end. Give this paragraph a class name, which we're going to reference during CSS later on. Use a div to create a container, which we're going to use to store our 3 buttons. Give it a class name so that we can reference it in CSS later on. Inside of this div, we're going to create a button element and give it a class of button. To call a function, we have to pass in an onClick event handler. So every time this button is clicked, a function will be called. By default, passing in a function will automatically call that function, so we have to set an anonymous function that will call our function when the button is clicked. We're going to repeat this 2 more times for the decrement button and the reset button. Now that we've finished with the HTML, we are going to create those functions. To store state in React, we have to use the useState hook provided by React. So we first have to import it. Now set an array with 2 items inside equal to the useState hook. The first item in the array is going to store the state, while the second item is a function that can be called to set that state. Passing a value into useState will set it as the default value for that state. So we're going to have to set the default state to 0. We're now going to create the doIncrement function. Inside, call the setCount and pass in the current count plus 1. This will update the state by adding 1 to the current count. Repeat this twice more for the decrement and reset functions. Now all we have to do is change the static value in the paragraph to a dynamic one. We do this by using braces and passing in the count state variable. Now we have a working counter app where we can increment, decrement, and reset a counter. Now let's move on to the CSS. We're going to reference the app and give it a display of grid to allow us to center the items inside. We're then going to reference the counter border to place the border around our elements and round the corners using border radius. Put some space between the border and the content by adding some padding. We use display flex here to further center everything. This is redundant, and in hindsight it would have been better just to center the text. Finally, add some margin to push the elements away from the sides, specifically the top. Font size of the counter text bigger by giving it a font size of 3 rem and making it bold as well. Reference the button counter and give it a display of flex so that we can use the gap property to put some spacing between the buttons. Now reference the button itself and use the border none to remove the default styling and use border radius to round the corners of the button. Give the button some spacing by placing some padding on it, and change the cursor type to a pointer type. Reference the pseudo class hover on the button to trigger a change on the hover state. Change the background color to a light blue. The cool part about React is that we can use conditional logic to set different properties or change certain elements. Add some conditional logic by using a ternary operator to add a certain class depending on if a condition is truthy or falsy. We're going to check if the count is greater than 0, and if this is true, we're going to add the green class. If this is false, we're then going to check if the count is less than 0, and if that is true, we're going to add the red class. Now simply add those classes in the CSS and set the colors respectively. This has been creating a counter app using React in just a couple of minutes. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.